Hi, this is David McGee, the editor of the Bristol Herald Courier, and we have breaking news. Our new podcast, Beyond Bylines, now has a presenting sponsor. Beyond Bylines is presented by Food City. Nobody does food like Food City. Welcome to Beyond Bylines, the podcast of the Bristol Herald Courier. I'm David McGee. I'm the editor of the Herald Courier. And joining us today is Willard Robertson, who has a relatively new title now as Executive Director of the Virginia Council on Problem Gaming. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be with you. Appreciate this opportunity to talk.
Absolutely. We did a story with you several years ago when you began doing some work in this field locally, and now you have a position with the state organization. Tell folks a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of what you're doing.
Well, pretty much a lifelong Southwestern Virginian with, it seems rather crazy now, but over 30 years of work in education, behavioral and mental health work, and some not-for-profit leadership. And so 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, I took a position with a local community services board in Virginia as a problem gambling prevention specialist, or a term I like to use is problem gambling prevention educator. And that was about the time that casinos became legalized in Virginia and sports books became legalized in Virginia. And so some funds were allocated to help community service boards that chose to start engaging in that work. And interesting thing about that is I really had no subjective or personal background with gambling, but I did have a keen interest in other things that I have found over time informed that. Learning, teaching, educating, mental health work. And the interesting thing I have found that's very applicable in my prevention role was that we see a lot of folks that may have a gambling disorder, but also have co-occurring mental health problems, depression, anxiety. We could go on from there, higher rate of suicide. And then one that particularly speaks to me is we see folks involved in gambling that often have significant trauma in their background. And so it was easy to find ways to relate to the needs of the position, even though I didn't have a personal background in understanding much about gambling. And I found that my role as a prevention educator, I also was able to do suicide awareness trainings in our community, engage with a local high school for 4 years, doing mental health first aid workshops and coursework with the students. And all that just informed my work. So same time, I've spent 3 years on the board of directors for the Virginia Council on Problem Gambling, which in itself was an amazing experience because those folks have been beating the drum for a long time on increasing awareness on gambling harm long before casinos came about and sports.
When was the council established?
Well, a little ambiguous on that, but let's say about 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so they've been running the state's problem gambling helpline since 2017 with the financial support of the Virginia Lottery, a strong, great partner in that work. So, there was funding that came about through some taxes that are levied against casinos and sports books. And Virginia Council on Problem Gambling eventually got privy to some of those funds. And so we went from being an all-volunteer organization to I was asked by the board to become the executive director. So it's the first time for the position. We've never had that before. And so we're doing a lot of building infrastructure and positioning ourselves to offer more and more of what we're here to do.
And for perspective, the vote on casinos came in 2020, and the first casinos are just now getting open in the last couple of years across Virginia. So you guys were ahead of that curve, and I think sports betting came along in 21, I believe.
Sounds about right.
So you guys were ahead of that curve. So you told me that this month actually is dedicated to awareness.
Yep.
About problem gambling. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. March each year for several years now is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. And we do, Virginia Council on Problem Gambling is an affiliate of the National Council on Problem Gambling. So this is a month-long campaign that they've done for a long time. Our theme this year is Caring Communities, Stronger Futures. And we're focusing a lot more this particular March on increasing community awareness. A lot of people that struggle with gambling harm or gambling addiction they do that in kind of isolation. And what we want to raise awareness of is when that person's struggling, it doesn't just affect them. It affects their families, it affects their workplace, it affects their community. And so the more awareness we can create with folks around to understand where it comes from and why it happens, I think the more empathetic we can be in understanding and then be more helpful. So that's really the focus for this month. And I know we'll probably get into this a little later, but one of the ways we do that in Southwestern Virginia is host a conference where we can really...
Let's talk about that now.
Sure.
You kind enough to share a flyer about it. That's going to be coming up on March 25th at the Higher Ed Center in Abingdon. And you have some speakers. Who is this conference aimed at?
It's fair to say everyone, anyone that has even the least bit of interest. Now, when you look at the nature of the presenters we have coming in, we have really hoped to get more folks that work in the clinical world involved and educated, or they already are very well educated, but just more knowledge focused on this. And we also focus on folks in recovery, and then we're kind of in line with the theme this year for Problem Gambling Awareness Month. We also have a speaker coming in to focus on community engagement. So it's really a wonderful endeavor. It's the third year we've done this conference. And when I say we, I spent the last 4 years with Highlands Community Services, which covers Washington County and the city of Bristol. And then we have partnered with the remaining community service boards, which would be Mount Rogers, Cumberland Mountain, Dickinson County, and Planning District 1. And I think I mentioned Cumberland, but all that cover blanket the entire southwestern part of the state, and put on this day-long conference, just pulling our resources and talents together. And those folks do a great job. I've been just loved working with them over the last 3-4 years. And so Higher Ed Center in Abingdon is a great location for it. It's day long. It starts at 9 this year. We're bringing in, our keynote speaker is an addiction specialist, a psychologist named Aaron Weiner. This does amazing research and presents some really great data. And Dorothy Cheney is another one of our featured speakers this year. She'll focus a lot on community engagement, coalitions, different stakeholders in a given community that are starting to key in, I think, into the importance of being aware of this as a public health issue. And so, Dorothy's going to speak to that, and I think it's a good time to do so. I know, for example, with the Washington County Prevention Coalition, which I remain a part of, we've taken on, at least trying to do more as a coalition to create awareness amongst all the people that are part of that public school system, police department, sheriff's department, various organizations like People Incorporated and so forth. So that's been great. And then the other important part too, I think, when we do a conference is the loudest voice, the most listened to voice in the room, as far as I'm concerned, always needs to be someone with lived experience that's been through it. And so a man named David Yeager is coming to be with us, an Army veteran who now works as a peer specialist and counselor for those that have gone through struggling with gambling harm. And he has his own really powerful and amazing story. So David will be with us as well to share that. And I think that always speaks so well to people when they can just hear someone's own journey and struggle with it, and that there is hope and healing on the other side.
So we've talked about it in general, but what are let's talk about problem gambling and what that looks like and how that manifests itself in people's lives. So if you have someone in your family, or someone that you are concerned about, that you think maybe that this is a problem for them, what are some things to look for? What are some of the visual cues maybe?
Yeah. Well, I think visual cues can be really hard because, one of the old nicknames for this is the hidden addiction. It's not like substance use, where enough of abusing a substance is probably going to show up on a person's self. And that's not the case with, we would call a gambling disorder a behavioral addiction. It has more to do with our actions and so forth, but it works the same way in the brain. It takes over. And so when somebody starts withdrawing, hiding things, secretive about how they spend their time, clearly money struggles. But I say that, and it's really important to point out that problem gambling isn't just a financial issue. As I alluded to earlier, and how I've keenly connected to the work is so often, I think, I'll give you an example. Some of the most powerful stories I've heard is someone who has lost a spouse after many years of a long, happy marriage, and they're grieving, and they engage in some form of gambling and realize that a period of time went by where they didn't feel grief. They were enjoying the rush of playing a game and enjoying themselves. And, that's what I'd call a trauma response. So I think being aware if that's something somebody started doing, and it need to be mindful to say too, the Virginia Council on Problem Gambling we take a neutral stance on gambling. We don't, it's here. We're not for or against it. Our role is to work with people who, who are struggling with the harm of it, and educating the public and anybody we can about here's the things to look for. So, in terms of things to look for, though, when somebody are those very things. I know we'll get into this soon, and it's very important. But for young people, it's becoming a distraction and a way to understand the world. It's become an increasingly digitalized world, and a big part of what we can do on our phone now has its risks when it comes to gambling and gaming harm.
Well, I spent a few minutes yesterday just to give people some concept if you don't follow this. In 2025, in calendar 2025, sports betting in Virginia, more than $7.7 billion was wagered.
It's a lot of money.
$7.7 billion.
And that's just Virginia.
That's just in Virginia,
right.
On sports. And 90+% was on the phone. I mean, you can literally, you've got the app on your phone, and you can be sitting in a restaurant and watching, sports bar or whatever, and you're watching games, and you can plug in and you can bet however much you want to bet.
Yep.
And without even, without really thinking about it, I guess is probably the best way to say it. That generates for the state $118 million in taxes. Casino gaming in 2025, they have a sports book at all the casinos, but the casino AGR was $969 million. That's not how much was wagered. That's how much the casinos reported making. The three casinos, that's $192 million in taxes. So, I mean, we're talking substantial amounts of money here. And you think about if you're wagering $50 or $100 or whatever on your favorite team, your favorite league, it won't take long to get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, and maybe it's also important to point out, research shows us that a large percentage of people know how to gamble responsibly. And for them, it's entertainment. And the principles behind that are setting limits. Knowing if you set aside a certain amount of money to go to the casino, enjoy betting on sports, and you're following those limits, and you're taking breaks, and you're doing all those things that are healthy, when you do it, great. But we know that that's not the case for everybody. I'll throw some numbers your way, sort of in the impact of those millions and millions. So let's just look at recent samples. So as I mentioned, Virginia Council on Problem Gambling, we oversee the state's helpline. And even if somebody were to call a national number, that still is routed to our number. So we're able to collect a good deal of data. So from 2024 to 2025, we had a 39% increase in calls to the helpline. That's massive, 39% in 1 year. And that's in line with the kind of jumps we're seeing year to year since 2019. So what that looks like in real numbers is almost 22,000 phone calls. Now, a more important statistic to think about with that, the number of calls is one thing, but even more importantly is how many of those people called realized they needed help and then started an intake process where we could start getting information, listen to their story, and connect them to help. So in that case, we saw a 50% increase from 2024 to 2025. That was well over 1,500 people that said, I'm ready to engage in receiving help. I need help. And going back to the prevalence of casino and sports books, when we look at the three most popular forms of gaming that for the year, and this is pretty much in line with the prior year. Number one, and these are all really close together, so there's almost no difference, but internet non-sports. So that would be the short way we get to call that is like a casino on your phone. Anything we can do, sweepstakes, anything, and a lot of this is not legal in Virginia. Almost all of it's not legal in Virginia, but that's the number one thing people call, and that would be about 23% of our total calls, our intakes. And then right behind that is sports betting at 22%. So we know sports betting is big and important. I mean, it looks like at times everybody's engaging in it. And then right behind that would be slots at a casino, which is pretty traditional for it to rank pretty highly because typically it's the most popular thing people do when they visit a casino. Right. Now, again, we can back up. I mentioned when I introduced myself, I'm a native Southwestern Virginian. I love my region so much. We can see the economic benefits that Hard Rock Bristol has brought and the particular revenue share that covers all of Southwest Virginia, which is pretty unique of the 5 casinos now operating in Virginia. So, we see the benefits of that, and it's wonderful. But the other side of that is, what about the people that are struggling? And, I'm really grateful to be in a role where we can be a part of the solution and the process for people to be well. So, but those numbers I want to offer too, because we're seeing that trajectory. Those numbers sound great. These numbers don't sound great, but that they kind of go hand in hand. The more people that engage, the more people we know that are going to have issues.
I know you have said in other stories that I've written about, I have had experts tell me that the biggest concern right now is young people.
Yeah.
And having young people having the ease of this and the convenience of this, because this is what they're used to. What does that look like from your all's perspective?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with a more subjective perspective. I'm a lifelong sports fan. I played high school football. My dream was I wanted to go to Virginia Tech and play, and then I wanted to go play for the Washington then Redskins, now
Right.
Commanders. So I say that to offer. I'm a sports fan, but when I grew up watching sports in the 70s and 80s, there was no sports betting ads and things like that. We understood it as sports, And what I've really had to work hard to understand now is we have a generation of people that don't understand sports outside the context of odds and betting and so forth. It is so intertwined with watching on a major network a game, and it's not just the advertisements, it's even the way oftentimes that your commentators will speak about the game and a particular player and so forth. And now we even have specials on major sports networks where that's what they focus on. So my point is, I think with young people that are sports fans, there's a different way of understanding their relationship to sports in general is different than mine was. There's a generational gap. And so, just working to understand that, I can tell you, going back to helpline data, the largest increase in calls came from people 18 to 24. And that's concerning. That we saw that rise significantly. That was 17.5% of the callers in that age bracket. It was 13% in that age bracket in 2024. So, those numbers, it was 9.1% in 2023.
So those are thousands of people.
Those are thousands of people. Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, when we see that, and it's not just sports betting, I think their numbers probably are also highest for anything, phone related, and everything, that somebody can do on their phone isn't necessarily gambling or game in that sense. But many things have gambling elements to them. And, again, it's a generational thing because I didn't grow up playing video games, but yet we know that there's gambling elements within video games that's exposing young people to that early on. The chance to win something that you didn't have just by chance, for a little bit of money or whatever. And there's all kinds of stories out there about that. But I think that, I can kind of go through this a little bit because we know youth engage a lot in online gambling. People, how do they do that? It's not even legal. It happens. We know this happens. Fantasy sports, youth do like to participate in fantasy sports leagues. The video game element that I spoke of earlier, we often refer to that as loot boxes or skin trading. So in video games, they're encouraged to spend real money for some in-game prize that may enhance their ability to play. Sports betting, of course, and it's eye-opening. I mean, I did a project with a high school basketball team where instead of just talking about gambling in general, I focused on talking about sports betting. And I think the other thing we see too, modeling what we show young people is so important. And honestly, with no ill intentions, I have encountered high school coaches who very innocently on maybe a bus ride to an away game are out on their phone on their sports betting app, but with no intention of showing that or maybe modeling something that for one of their student athletes, but they're doing it anyway and not aware that it's not a good idea, because, coaches can be very influential people, right? So, I think that's part of really kind of, it's one small piece of like the awareness we want to create. Like we need to be aware of how we're presenting this out there. So I'll say a few things too about gambling and gaming, since we're talking about young people, the overlap. So, and I mentioned it, a lot of games contain elements. I mentioned loot boxes or play to win, skins betting, those sort of things. But the interesting thing to note is the psychology behind these mechanisms is the same as what happens like in a slot machine. there's a fancy term for it, variable ratio reinforcement, but it's the most addictive reward schedule known. The way it engages somebody. So obviously, as more things become accessible, especially digitally, um, most people don't ever engage in just one form of gambling. You might equate it to alcohol. Somebody preference may be beer and they can't get beer, but they're now in the addictive state of that use. So anything else will do. It's okay if it's a bottle of wine or something else, right? And I think may not be the most fair comparison, but just to offer something to compare it to, it's very seldom that, like, even when we ask that question on intakes, it's what's your primary. But oftentimes people will list several forms of gambling that they're engaged in.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? Where does the council go from here to raise more awareness, to do more programming, to help more people?
Well, there's lots of approaches to that, and I think Virginia is in a position to engage in that more and more. So we've mentioned one, and that's a conference that's open to anybody, where we just do anything we can to create more awareness. I think in this case, it is a little bit more of a top-down approach when you're holding a conference. You're probably going to have more service-oriented people working in the field who want to know more, but that's an important approach to take. I think too, the more we can help just anybody. I know Virginia Council coming up is going to be offering a media campaign that will be used statewide, where the intention with that is we're going to focus on educating parents and caregivers on things to be mindful of. And we're not just going to focus on them, we're also going to direct some of that attention toward helping young folks become more aware of the risks. Something I have a lot of investment in through the years of teaching is brain development. And any student I've had can tell you, well, my brain's not fully developed till I'm in my mid-20s. We make sure they know that. But, we talk about things like how old, should you be 18 or 21 before you can legally engage in a form of gambling? We're always going to push for 21 because we know we're not going to get 25.
What's the law say?
Well, it's 21 for most everything in Virginia except the lottery. You can purchase lottery tickets and so forth at age 18. I think that's one reason that age is important. And it gets beat up sometimes, and there are a few states that allow certain types of gambling for 18, but by and large, that's why. But kind of back to the point is we want young people to realize they have this amazing thing sitting above their shoulders, and it needs to be protected. And I certainly was the kind of teenager, I took my chances with things, risk-taking behavior and all that stuff, and not mindful of protecting my noggin. But at the same time, I like to look at it like this: if I can just give that student some knowledge, if I can give them something that can be in the hopper, if you will, and they might apply that at some point in their decision-making process, it may save a bad situation later.
You said something that I wanted to ask you about, I wanted to follow up with. I know in my interactions locally with the casino, they have been they have a lot of signage. They have a lot of warnings. They are very pro awareness of, if you have a problem, these are the steps you should take. And then there are programs that if people self-identify as having a gambling problem, that they can be excluded and they can't even enter a casino. Do the online sports books and do these other games that you're talking about, these other online casinos, do they offer similar warnings to people?
Yes. Any sports book licensed to operate in Virginia has to make a helpline available and some messaging around that. They also participate in what's called the self-exclusion program. That's often a step that's introduced to people who are ready to step away from gambling. And it can be limiting how much they can do in some processes, or it can be removing themselves for 2 years, 5 years, or a lifetime. And I think what we're working harder on now is that network of self-exclusion can be nationwide across any form of gambling. That's a tall ask, but I think it's important to get. So yeah, self-exclusion is important, and you're very right. Hard Rock Bristol is a great partner in that they keep the helpline out there. They have a very strong responsible gambling and gaming program. Their staff are trained to recognize things. I think that's important. And we're watching more and more. I can't speak a whole lot to this, but one of the things that's a bit exciting is the University of Virginia at Wise has started, and I hope I'll speak about this correctly, but a hospitality and tourism program with a part of that focused on casino, to the best that I understand it now. But the professor that's over that had reached out to us recently, wanting to make sure that part of the perspective the students in that program get is, what does gambling harm look like? What are resources out there for people that are doing that? And I so respect that. I think that's important, that, while it can be an exciting career, but part of just being a caring community is, can we make ourselves aware too of what the harmful side of that looks like, so that we can care for those people too. So I love that they've done that.
Very good. Anything else I should have asked you about? Anything else you want to say about this issue? I know we could talk for hours.
We could. Well, no, I think, I can say that sometimes it feels a little bit like the Wild West. There's so much going on. We're looking at Virginia. Virginia's looking very strongly at legalizing more forms of gambling. I think one of the most important things that would be helpful is a central oversight, a gaming commission in Virginia. And
I know there's been talk about that.
There's been a lot of talk
years,
about that,
yeah.
and legislation even this year. And of course, the General Assembly is still at work, so we don't know what that's going to look like just yet. But I think getting more oversight is important for multiple reasons, just so things stay fair and there's funding put in the right places and that sort of thing. But
so you're talking primarily about gray machines, the machines that were in the convenience stores and restaurants that were illegal, and then they were legal, and then they were illegal again.
Yeah.
And
that part has particularly felt a little bit like the Wild West. But and even that, there's legislation to go ahead and we know they're operating now through an assumed loophole, and not everywhere, but in a lot of places. I think the concern about that is, back to the Gaming Commission, oversight of those things is so important, and legislation that's out there now, if it's approved, does put some of that in place. But it's a tall ask, because the age limit, how old you need to be to play, and the convenience of going to the convenience store to play, and then is it a safe place in terms of can that store staff be equipped to do the proper ID checks, and is there awareness messaging as part of all that? All those things are very important. Whether they become legal or not, as I've said before, isn't necessarily the issue for us. But if it's going to be so, what are the safeguards we can put in place? And then in the background, we're going to continue to grow the network of treatment providers and research initiatives and connections to youth and all the things that are needed, so that people become aware of what it looks like, so we can always take an empathetic approach and offer that person healing. The last thing I'll say,
go ahead.
Well, I'll just say this. It's a word that gets used a lot, but I really love it. When I worked with my students at the local high school the last 4 years, for a fun opening question, I always say, pick a superpower, what would it be? And it's really fun what they come up with. But at the end of those 10 sessions I do with them, I said, let me tell you one you already have, and it's called resilience. Humans are amazing. We have this ability to bounce back, to heal, to become an even better version of ourselves. And so I think that resilience piece is really important, because when somebody struggles with gambling harm, it sneaks up on you, and then it's devastating. And it can take a long time, and then you wind up other things getting piled in with it, mental health issues, not just the financial stress, all that sort of thing. And so, I remind everybody, and we all have it too. I have it and you have it, resilience, this ability to heal and go forward. So, I love that, part of my role with the council and part of my role in this work is we can champion that.
Very good. What's the helpline number?
The helpline number is 1-888-532-3500. I have to say, though, a lot of folks are probably used to hearing a number called 1-800-GAMBLER. It's directed to our number. There's a new national number, 1-800-MY-RESET. And it, too, if somebody calls, that number is directed to our Virginia number. And I always like to do this, too, because we're seeing increasing numbers of people who use the internet to find out how to get help. VCPG.net. That's our website, and there's resources there for a little bit of everybody.
Absolutely. Willard Robertson, thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate it. This is Beyond Bylines from the Bristol Herald Courier. I'm David McGee.